Vanessa had $30 and two hungry kids. No help, no backup, just one envelope. She didn't panic. She planned. 1 week, 3 meals a day, not a single skip plate. $30 didn't just feed them, it changed them. $30 grocery challenge. How I fed my family for a week. Smart Saver Saturday. Subscribe for real stories of resilience. Vanessa didn't plan on starting a challenge. She just ran out of options. It was a Thursday night. Wind howled through the loose seams of her old apartment windows. And inside, the glow of the open fridge lit up a truth she couldn't ignore anymore. There was almost nothing left. A half-used bottle of ketchup, a stick of butter, a near-empty jug of milk that smelled one day too far gone. And in that moment, staring into that humming cold void, Vanessa did something she hadn't done in a long time. She laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity of it all, trying to feed two kids with 23 cents in the bank, was the kind of irony only exhaustion could find humor in. That laugh broke the silence, then broke into a sigh. She closed the fridge door softly. She didn't cry. Not anymore. That version of her, the one who used to cry over bank balances and broken promises, had been gone for a while. Vanessa had no time for tears. What she needed was a plan. Because in the next 48 hours, her kids would ask, "Mom, what's for dinner?" And she needed an answer. The fridge was a symptom, not the problem. The problem was the way everything had snowballed. First, the rent jumped. Then her hours got cut. Then the schools started sending home those friendly reminders about unpaid lunch balances. There wasn't any one moment where it all broke. It just cracked slowly. The groceries were the last thread. And now, even that was unraveling. Vanessa moved through her kitchen with practiced grace. She opened the cabinets, scanning labels, checking expiration dates, half hopeful she'd find something she missed the last dozen times. But it was the same story. Flour, a few cans of beans, oatmeal, a bag of rice. Enough to scrape through a day or two, maybe, but nothing that could stretch for a week. Nothing a kid would want twice. Still, she counted. Then she opened her drawer where the receipts lived. This was where her hope used to go to die. Scribbled ink and numbers reminding her of every mistake. But this time, she studied them. She wasn't looking for guilt. She was looking for patterns. And that's when it hit her. If she could spend less than $30 and make that food stretch, not just survive, but thrive, then maybe she didn't need to wait for the next paycheck to feel empowered. Maybe she could flip the story. Not, we don't have enough. But let's see how far we can go with what we've got. She opened her browser, typed, "Feed a family of 3 for $30. And down the rabbit hole she went. Reddit threads, Pinterest boards, frugal blogs run by moms who turned savings into survival art. People who had been where she was, or worse, and made it work. It wasn't long before her notebook came out. Page 1. The $30 grocery challenge. She didn't even know if it was possible, but something in her spine straightened. This was her challenge now, not the world's. Hers. The next morning, she sat at the table with her two kids, Jamal, age 9, and Ayana, age 6. "Okay," she said, holding up a pen like a teacher. "We're doing something fun this week." Jamal squinted. "Is it a no-spending challenge again?" Ayana giggled. "Like when we didn't use the lights all day." Vanessa smiled. "Kinda. But this time it's food." She explained it in their language. A game. A mission. A challenge to make the best meals with just $30. They were all in. Because what her kids didn't know, what they didn't need to carry, was the pressure behind that number. All they needed to feel was the adventure. And that's how it started. Not with shame. Not with fear. But with an empty fridge and a pen. Vanessa didn't start the challenge because she was bored. She didn't do it for social media or some viral trend. She did it because she had no choice. It was Thursday. Wind curled down the narrow alleys of her Cleveland apartment complex, slamming against the aging windows of Unit 3B like a fist demanding to be let in. Inside, the heat had already clicked off for the night, and the chill had begun to crawl along the kitchen tiles. Vanessa stood barefoot on the cold floor, arms wrapped around herself in an oversized hoodie. The fridge was open. Its fluorescent light hummed softly, casting a pale glow across the room, illuminating nothing. Not nothing exactly, but close. There was a quarter stick of butter, 2 eggs, a sad plastic bag of wilted baby carrots, and a half-empty gallon of milk that smelled just one day too sour. The rest? Condiments. Old mustard. That jar of relish no one touched. A bottle of soy sauce, so crusted around the lid, it was practically sealed shut. Vanessa stared, unmoving. This was the third time she'd checked the fridge in the last hour. And she knew there wasn't going to be a miracle. Food doesn't multiply when you're desperate, no matter how many times you open the door. And still she laughed. A single breath of dry humor puffed out of her. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous. Here she was, 32 years old, a mom of two, working part-time at a call center, picking up side gigs on TaskRabbit, selling extra baby clothes on Facebook Marketplace when she could. And yet tonight, her kitchen had less food than the vending machine down the street. The laugh cracked under its own weight and dissolved into a sigh. She didn't cry. That version of her, the Vanessa who used to cry over bounced checks or the sudden cut of SNAP benefits, was long gone. She was tired, yes, but not broken. Tired is manageable. Broken is a luxury she couldn't afford. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. Her kids were already asleep in the other room, and Vanessa didn't dare wake them. She needed this moment of stillness. She shut the fridge gently, not with the usual frustration, but like saying goodbye to an old friend. Something inside her clicked. It wasn't just about groceries. This wasn't just about a bad week. This was about the last 6 months. Maybe longer. The economy hadn't been kind. Rent had gone up by $180. Her shifts had been reduced. Again. The school kept sending those passive-aggressive reminders about unpaid lunch balances, and she'd already returned the Wi-Fi router after switching to a cheaper data plan that barely loaded homework assignments. All of it, every choice, had been survival. And groceries? Groceries were always last. First came rent, then gas, then school supplies, then electricity, then whatever was left. She tried to make stretch between apples and instant noodles. But tonight, there was nothing left to stretch. She walked to the cabinet, opened it slowly. Shelf 1, a bag of oats, some expired bread, 3 small potatoes. Shelf 2, canned black beans, a denikin of corn, 1 box of instant mashed potatoes. Shelf 3, spices, tea bags, baking soda, and that old bag of white rice she'd been saving for a rainy day. Well, the storm had arrived. Still, she started doing what she always did, calculating, weighing, not in pounds or ounces, but in possibility. How many meals could she wring out of these items? Maybe oatmeal for breakfast, if the milk held up. Beans and rice, that could stretch for dinner. Carrots and mashed potatoes. Ayanna hated both. The math didn't work. Not with 3 mouths. Not for 7 days. She sat at the chip kitchen table and pulled out her red spiral notebook. The one with Bills Plus budget, scribbled across the front in thick black Sharpie. Inside were receipts, grocery lists, scribbles, a map of struggle. She flipped to the back, where there was a clean page, and she began writing. $30 grocery challenge. 3 words. That's all. It wasn't inspiration. Not yet. It was desperation looking for form. Vanessa opened her laptop and began searching. Feed a family of 3 for $30. Frugal meal planning. Dollar store groceries recipes. She fell down the rabbit hole. There were moms in rural towns who swore by canned soup hacks. College students sharing instant ramen gourmet tutorials. A retired couple living off beans and tomatoes with pride. Reddit threads. Food blogs. YouTube channels. One woman had shared a challenge. $27.43 for 7 days. She'd posted photos. Receipts. Even her kid smiles at the end. And it hit Vanessa hard. Maybe this wasn't impossible. Maybe this was her way through. She jotted down everything that caught her eye. Split peas. Canned mackerel. Day-old bread. The next thing she knew, she'd outlined 7 possible dinners. Not fancy ones. Not Instagram-worthy. But hot meals. Nutritious enough. Filling. The next morning, the apartment smelled like cold air and ambition. Jamal, age 9, shuffled into the kitchen, his eyes half closed. Ayanna, 6, padded behind him with her usual pink blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. Vanessa had their oatmeal already boiling, sweetened with a bit of cinnamon and brown sugar she'd scavenged from the pantry. She smiled at them. Today, she said, we're doing something a little different. Jamal blinked. Like what? It's a challenge, she said. Ayanna grinned. Like the ice bucket one. Vanessa laughed. No ice. Just groceries. We're gonna feed all of us. All week, which is $30. You guys in? Jamal looked hesitant. What if we get hungry? She reached across the table, squeezed his hand. Then we'll get creative. And I promise, you won't go hungry. They were quiet. Then Ayanna clapped once. Okay. Like a game. Vanessa nodded. Exactly. It wasn't a lie. They weren't starving. They weren't hopeless. But they were tired of the cycle. And this gave them a narrative. A mission. It turned scarcity into strategy. Fear into focus. Vanessa stood taller. Her fridge might have been empty. But for the first time in weeks, her mind was full. She made a list. She researched flyers. She scouted local stores. She checked dollar store inventory online and called 3 grocers to see who still sold eggs under $2. She planned the entire week with precision, combining rice with beans, stretching cans into soups, turning leftover mash into fried patties, and baking muffins with just flour, oats, and mashed bananas. Every meal had a multitask. Every bite had to work. And for once, she wasn't dreading grocery day. She was preparing for it like a general before battle. She had exactly $32.18 left on her prepaid card. She'd use $30, max. The rest? A buffer. Just in case. Vanessa zipped up her hoodie, grabbed her reusable bags, kissed her kids goodbye, and stepped out into the icy morning air. She wasn't sure if she'd pull it off, but she knew this. For once, she wasn't playing defense with her money. She was in control, and that was the most powerful thing she'd felt in months. Vanessa stood at the bus stop, cold wind nipping at her ankles, with a shopping list in one hand and hope clutched in the other. In that moment, her budget wasn't just a number. It was a lifeline. She had $30. That was it. Not a penny more. No credit cards. No hidden savings. No treat-yourself allowance. Just 30 crisp dollars loaded on a prepaid card she double-checked 3 times before leaving. In her backpack, 3 reusable bags, a wrinkled notebook, a printed map of 3 stores she could walk between in one afternoon, and a calculator that still had battery. This wasn't a grocery trip. It was a mission, and she was ready. The first stop was Discount Depot, one of those narrow aisles, off-brand kind of stores that locals either swore by or swore off. But for Vanessa, it had become something else entirely over the years, a proving ground. It was where you learned the real price of things. Not the price they put on billboards, but the one you paid when you needed to make every coin count. The smell of plastic wrap and old produce hit her as she entered. She nodded at the clerk near the entrance, a young man in his 20s wearing oversized headphones, disinterested but polite. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She went straight for the staples. Oats, $1.29 for a 1-pound bag. Dried lentils, $1.99. Rice, $2.49 for a 2-pound bag. Canned tomato paste, 3 for $1. Canned black beans, 2 for $1. Each item she picked up came with mental math. Not just cost, but what it could become. Could that bag of lentils stretch for 3 meals? If she added carrots? If she mashed them into patties? Could the rice be split across dinner and lunch? With eggs? On tortillas? This wasn't mindless shopping. It was chess, and she was playing 6 moves ahead. As she walked down the next aisle, she spotted a woman who looked about her age, dressed similarly in thrifted layers, scanning prices with the same tired yet focused expression. Their eyes met for a moment. Both nodded. It wasn't friendship. It was recognition, an unspoken understanding between women who knew what it meant to turn $2 into dinner. Not once, but over and over again. Vanessa pressed on. She skipped the processed section, ignored the colorful cereals and sugar-coated traps. Her kids wouldn't be thrilled, but this wasn't about excitement. It was about enough. At the checkout, she placed her small haul on the belt. No impulse buys. No surprises. Just rice, lentils, beans, tomato paste, a bag of carrots, a dozen eggs, 1 pack of store-brand tortillas, a block of off-brand cheese, a bag of frozen mixed vegetables, 1 small head of cabbage. The total? $14.87. She swiped the prepaid card. It cleared. That was the first win. Not a huge one, but in that moment, it felt like a victory parade. Next stop, Price Right, 3 blocks east. She walked. The wind had picked up, biting through her hoodie, making her wish she'd brought gloves. But there was no room in her life for missteps. Every cent saved counted more than comfort. As she walked, she thought about her kids. Jamal was old enough to notice now. He watched how often she said, "Not today," at the store. He saw how many dinners were made from the same 3 ingredients. Ayanna, sweet and still full of wonder, called it Mom's magic food. But even magic had limits. Vanessa had seen her children's eyes scan the dinner table lately. Quietly. Not with judgment, but with hope. Hope that this time maybe there would be seconds. This week, she promised herself there would be. Price Right was bigger, colder, more industrial. The kind of place where prices were low but choices were few. She walked past shelves stacked to the ceiling, her eyes flicking from price tags to the list and back again. She needed bananas, a bag of flour, store-brand peanut butter, 1 can of evaporated milk, a loaf of day-old bread, and if she had anything left over, maybe a treat, even something small, a morale booster. She moved fast, focused. Her cart wasn't full, but her mind was racing. She added up each price as she went, calculating tax, rounding up to stay safe. Flour, $2.19. Bananas, 58 cents per pound, about $1.20 for 5. Peanut butter, $1.89. Evaporated milk, 89 cents. Bread, 99 cents. That brought her to $7.16. Total so far, $22.03. That left just under $8. She stood still for a moment, caught between 2 aisles. Then she turned into the clearance rack, the island of almost expired, dented but edible items. And there it was, a small jar of strawberry jam for 79 cents. She smiled. Ayanna would call it treasure. Back home, Vanessa lined everything up on the counter. Each item accounted for, each one serving a purpose. She started sorting, beans with rice, flour with oats, veggies with lentils. She took a photo, not to post, just to remember, because this was more than groceries. It was a statement. We did this. We made it work. Later that night, with the kids in bed and her kitchen finally still, Vanessa sat down with her notebook again. She drew a calendar across the top of the page. 7 days. Each square got a meal plan. Monday, breakfast, oatmeal with banana slices. Lunch, lentil veggie soup. Dinner, rice, beans, and fried cabbage. Tuesday, breakfast, toast with peanut butter. Lunch, rice patties with carrot slaw. Dinner, tortilla wraps with eggs and mixed veggies. Wednesday, oat banana muffins for breakfast. Leftover soup for lunch. Lentil cakes with roasted carrots for dinner. It went on. 7 full days. Balanced. Bare bones, but complete. Her pen hovered over the final square on Sunday night. She wrote, "Victory meal. Toast plus jam plus banana equals happiness." She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath since she stepped into that first store. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long time, that word didn't feel like settling. It felt like winning. The first morning of the challenge arrived like most others in Vanessa's world. Early, quiet, and cold. But this time, something was different. She woke up with intention. No last-minute panic about what to throw into the kids' lunchboxes. No mental math juggling eggs against leftovers. No rummaging through a cabinet she knew by heart. This morning, she had a plan. Vanessa slipped out of bed before the sun rose. The apartment was still. The kind of stillness that feels both peaceful and fragile, like the calm right before a storm or the few minutes of quiet that belong to mothers before the day steals them back. In the kitchen, she stood barefoot in front of the stove, tying her curls into a loose bun. She glanced at the list taped to the fridge. Day 1, oatmeal plus banana. 2 ingredients. 1 mission, start strong. She opened the cupboard, retrieved the oats, 1 cup. Boiled water. Stir in a pinch of salt, cinnamon, and a drizzle of the evaporated milk to make it creamy. It wasn't much, but she cooked it like it mattered, like it deserved respect. Then she sliced half a banana per bowl. 3 bowls in total. 1 for her, 2 for the kids. She arranged them on the counter like a diner waitress. Even added a little peanut butter swirl to each one, just to elevate the flavor. When you only have $30 to work with, you can't buy luxury. But you can cook with dignity. And that was something no price tag could limit. Jamal wandered in first, still rubbing his eyes. "Smells good," he mumbled, sliding into his chair. "Chef Vanessa, at your service," she teased, placing a bowl in front of him with a small theatrical bow. He grinned. "So, we're doing the challenge now." She nodded. "Yup. Day 1. How's your oatmeal?" He took a bite, chewed, nodded. "Tastes like regular oatmeal," he shrugged, "but better. Sweeter or something." She smiled. It was probably just the banana. Or maybe the joy of having something warm to wake up to. Ayanna entered next, dragging her blanket cape behind her. "Jamie says it's sweet," she said as she climbed into her chair. "It is," Vanessa said. "Want to guess the secret?" "Magic." "Close." "Bananas." Ayanna grinned. "Banana magic." Breakfast cost about 65 cents for the whole family. Vanessa had done the math. It wasn't just about feeding them. It was about stretching. Oats were cheap, but filling. Bananas added flavor and fiber. The swirl of peanut butter added protein. And it filled their bellies with something warm. Something kind. She watched as both bowls were scraped clean. There was no second serving. Not yet. But the kids didn't ask. By 8:30 a.m., the kids were bundled and out the door. Jamal with his oversized backpack. Ayanna in her bubblegum pink coat and mismatched gloves. Vanessa kissed them both goodbye and reminded Jamal to look out for his sister at the crossing light. Once the door closed, she stood in silence again. Now was her time. Not for rest. Not yet. For lunch prep. She moved like a machine, precise, focused. Today's lunch was lentil vegetable soup. In a large pot, she sautéed chopped carrots and cabbage in oil with garlic and a sprinkle of red pepper flakes. Just enough heat to make it interesting. She added a cup of rinsed lentils, water, salt, and stirred in a few spoonfuls of tomato paste. She let it simmer, lid slightly ajar, until the smell filled the apartment with something that almost resembled hope. While the soup simmered, Vanessa used the spare minutes to prep rice for dinner. She didn't just want to cook one meal at a time. She needed to think in layers. Cook once, eat twice. She boiled 2 cups of rice, one for tonight, one for tomorrow's lunch. She jotted notes in her red notebook. Day 1 lunch. Lentil soup cost $1.20 total / 3 servings. She also made space under that to track reactions. This wasn't just about food. This was a study, a self-made guidebook to surviving scarcity with strategy and soul. Lunch was eaten alone. She ladled herself a bowl of soup, sat at the small kitchen table, and sipped slowly. It was good, simple, spiced enough to feel like a recipe, not an accident. The lentils were soft, the broth rich. She added some leftover rice halfway through the bowl and let it absorb, stretching it further, warming her twice. As she ate, she thought about her own mother. How she used to say, "When your fridge is empty, your imagination needs to be full." Vanessa hadn't understood that when she was 12. Now, she could write a book on it. The rest of the afternoon blurred into movement. She did a load of laundry in the basement, sent out 2 emails about a possible cleaning gig, reposted Ayanna's old winter boots on Facebook Marketplace for $5. She didn't rest, because rest, for Vanessa, wasn't built into the day. It had to be earned. And earned rest came after dinner, when the kitchen was clean, and the kids were full, and the lights were dimmed, and her phone was plugged in beside the bed. She lived for that final breath, the one right before sleep, where everything was quiet and the world stopped asking her to fix it. Dinner was simple, just like the plan. Rice with black beans, sautéed cabbage, and melted cheese. She crisped the rice in a frying pan to give it texture, a trick she learned from a YouTube chef who cooked street food on a budget. She heated the beans with cumin, onion powder, and a dash of the soy sauce from the back of the fridge. She layered them together in bowls and added a sprinkle of cheese, just enough to feel generous without burning through the block. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't flashy, but it smelled like comfort. And in her home, that was currency. "Dinner time," she called. Jamal arrived first again. Ayanna followed, face pink from the cold. They sat, looked down, looked at each other. Jamal was the first to speak. "This smells kind of like that taco night thing." "Almost," Vanessa said. "No meat this time, but same spices." Ayanna poked her fork into the cabbage. "It's green. It's cooked green," Vanessa said with a smile. "Try it first, then complain." She held her breath, not visibly, but inside. She watched them take their first bites. Ayanna nodded. "It's good." Jamal took another forkful. Kind of like that burrito bowl we got once, but better 'cause it's hot. Vanessa let her shoulders relax. That was all she needed. After dinner, they cleared their bowls and played a short game of Uno on the floor before winding down. It was part of their new challenge week tradition, something light and fun after meals. Jamal won 2 rounds. Ayanna accused them both of cheating. Laughter filled the living room, and it wasn't forced. Vanessa watched them from her corner of the couch, their small faces glowing under the soft lamp, and she thought, this is what matters. Not what's on the plate, but what happens around it. Later, when the apartment had returned to stillness, she cleaned the dishes by hand and prepped breakfast oats for soaking overnight. She glanced at the notebook again and updated it. Dinner: rice plus beans plus cabbage plus cheese, $2.40/3 servings. Reactions: both kids liked it. No leftovers. Might repeat Thursday. She flipped to the back of the notebook and wrote a line she hadn't expected. Day 1. Nobody went hungry. Not even me. And that, for Vanessa, was a revolution. Wednesday didn't start with the same quiet resolve as the first 2 days. It started with a headache, and dishes still in the sink. Vanessa woke to the sound of the alarm on her prepaid phone, its vibration humming across the end table like a gentle warning. Get up. The plan doesn't work without you. She sat up slowly. Her body felt heavier than usual, not from lack of food, but from the mental weight of repetition. Same breakfast, same pantry, same challenges. She pulled on her hoodie, wrapped her head in a scarf, and shuffled into the kitchen. It was still dark outside. Still. That word had started to haunt her this week. Everything felt still, unchanging, motionless, even as she moved. Today's breakfast was another bowl of oatmeal. This time, she took the Reddit user's advice and added a sprinkle of brown sugar and cinnamon. It wasn't fancy, just a teaspoon she'd borrowed from the back of her spice shelf, barely enough to register on the tongue. But when Ayanna took her first bite, her eyes lit up. It tastes like cookie. Vanessa laughed. Well, a very healthy cookie. Jamal was quieter, still polite, but his eyes scanned the table with a kind of tired curiosity. Are we going to have this every day? He finally asked. Vanessa paused, then answered honestly. Not forever. Just this week. Just the challenge. He nodded, not with disappointment, but with understanding. Okay, I'm just missing cereal a little. She reached over and squeezed his hand. I get that. We'll have a cereal party next week. Okay. Okay. And just like that, the mood lifted, not because anything changed, but because the feeling of being seen had replaced the frustration of being stuck. After the kids left for school, Vanessa decided to take her own advice from the night before. Rebrand the meals. Shake up the rhythm. Make the old feel new. She flipped to the second page of her notebook, where she'd started sketching backup meal variations. Half-finished ideas from last night stared back at her like puzzle pieces. Idea number 1. Lentil burgers. Idea number 2. Rice pancakes. Idea number 3. Cabbage stir-fry over toast. She tapped the page with her pen, then stood up and got to work. Lunch was the first experiment of the day. She drained and mashed leftover lentils with carrots, added flour, spices, and just enough oil to hold it together. She shaped the mixture into small patties, then pan-fried them until golden brown. As they cooked, the scent filled the kitchen, warm, earthy, with a little crisp at the edges. She toasted 2 slices of the day-old bread and laid the patties on top with a spread of peanut butter, just to try something new. She took a bite and was surprised. It was hearty, crunchy outside, soft inside, slightly nutty from the peanut butter. A little weird, sure, but it worked. She jotted the recipe in the back of her notebook and titled it Lentil Crunch Sandwich, Emergency Energy Meal. It cost her maybe $1.15 to make 2 full sandwiches. And for the first time in 2 days, she felt like she'd cooked something herself, not just survived it. At 3:30, the kids came home, loud and full of backpack clatter and questions. Ayanna had a drawing of their family eating at a fancy restaurant, where all the plates were big and filled with stars. Vanessa almost teared up. Jamal had news. Ms. Perez says we're doing a family culture week, and we got to bring in a recipe from home. Vanessa blinked. From this home? He held out the paper. We have to bring it Friday. It can be anything. She said even something simple is okay. She nodded slowly. Inside, a voice whispered, Do I tell the class that your recipe costs 38 cents a serving? Do I call it lentil magic and pretend it's a tradition? But another voice rose louder. You get to show your kids that pride doesn't depend on money. She smiled. We'll think of something good, she said. Something that tells our story. Dinner that night was another remix. Instead of plain rice and beans, Vanessa used leftover cabbage, rice, a chopped boiled egg, and sautéed everything together with garlic, oil, and tomato paste to make a kind of stir-fried budget jambalaya. She served it with a name. Vanessa's Victory Bowl. Ayanna clapped when she heard the name. Jamal laughed. What did we win? Vanessa raised her fork. We made it halfway through the week. Then I'm eating 2 bowls, he said. She smiled. The bowl was simple. Less than $2.20 for the whole pan. But it was something different. Something warm. And when you renamed dinner, it felt less like repetition and more like tradition. That night, as they cleaned the kitchen together, Ayanna asked, Can I help make breakfast tomorrow? Vanessa was stunned. You want to help cook? Yeah. Can I stir? Vanessa thought about it. Her little girl wasn't asking because she loved oatmeal. She was asking because she wanted to be part of the effort, to feel included, empowered. And wasn't that the whole point? Yes, Vanessa said softly. Tomorrow, you're the chef. Ayanna beamed. After bedtime, Vanessa sat on the couch under the only working lamp. Her notebook lay open beside her, filled with messy notes, oil-stained corners, and crossouts. But it was beautiful, because it was working. She flipped to a fresh page and titled it, Family Recipe for Jamal's Class. She paused, then wrote, Lentil and carrot patties. A survival meal. A strength meal. A we still showed up kind of meal. Ingredients. What we had. Seasoning. Love. And maybe some garlic powder. She stopped and smiled. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Before bed, she checked her phone again. The Reddit thread had more replies. One user had written, My mom used to call them bean cakes when we were broke. I still crave them sometimes. Not because they tasted great, but because I knew they meant she was trying. Vanessa sat with that for a while, then typed, Mine are called victory cakes now, because some days, surviving the middle of the week is the biggest win. She hit send, and went to sleep smiling. By Thursday, the kitchen no longer smelled like oatmeal. It smelled like persistence, and a little bit of something new. Because this morning, Ayanna was stirring. Literally. Perched on a kitchen stool, sleeves rolled up, curls pulled into a puff held together by a rainbow scrunchie, she was laser-focused on the pot in front of her. Vanessa stood close by, guiding her hand gently. Stir slow. Like it's paint, she said. Ayanna grinned. Banana paint. They'd mashed the last of the ripe bananas into the oats today. Stirred in a pinch of cinnamon and a whisper of brown sugar. No peanut butter this time. Vanessa was saving what was left for Friday's lunch sandwiches. But something about Ayanna's presence in the kitchen made it feel less like rationing and more like sharing. Jamal walked in, blinked once, then smiled. She's the chef now. Ayanna beamed. Call me Chef E. Vanessa laughed. And today's special is banana cinnamon oatmeal, made with love and exactly 17 cents worth of ingredients. He sat down and gave his sister a thumbs up. You're better than Mom already. Ayanna stuck out her tongue. Vanessa just stood there, watching them, this little, unremarkable Thursday morning moment, and felt a strange lump rise in her throat. Because even though the meals were repeating, even though her body was tired and the cupboards were thinner than ever, there was joy in this kitchen. Not because of the food, but because of them. Later that morning, after school drop-off, Vanessa sat on the couch with her notebook and stared at the numbers. 3 days left. She had $1.38 in physical cash tucked into her coat pocket. Emergency reserve. No food stamps until the following Monday. No new income until the Sunday cleaning job. No help. Just the contents of her fridge, her pantry, her stubborn will, and a list of ideas. Lunch was handled. She'd make grilled peanut butter sandwiches with carrot sticks on the side. It would cost less than $1 to feed all 3 of them. But what weighed on her today wasn't lunch or even dinner. It was this thought. What happens when it's all over? Not just the challenge, but the pace she'd been keeping. The mental calculations. The physical labor. The constant redirection of hunger into gratitude. She couldn't help but ask herself, am I surviving? Or am I just making survival look graceful? She stood up and walked into the kitchen. There, on the counter, sat the last 3 tortillas. 2 eggs. Half a head of cabbage. A bag with 2 scoops of rice. 1 can of black beans. She lined them up like chess pieces. This was Thursday night's dinner, but the idea of serving another bowl made her chest ache. So instead, she let her imagination do the cooking. She grabbed a muffin tin from the back of the cabinet, the one she hadn't used in over a year. She chopped the cabbage finely and sautéed it with garlic and tomato paste, then stirred in black beans and leftover rice. She cracked in 2 beaten eggs to bind it all. Then she spooned the mixture into the muffin tin like she was baking a savory pie. Budget bakes. She chuckled to herself. It sounded like a segment on one of those cooking shows she used to watch before the Wi-Fi got cut. While it baked, she prepped the dessert. Yes, dessert. It was time to shift the emotional energy in the house, even if just for one night. She peeled and froze the last banana earlier that week. Now, she took it out and dropped the frozen slices into her cheap blender with the last spoonful of peanut butter, a splash of the evaporated milk, and a few grains of brown sugar. She blended until it turned creamy. Banana ice cream. Soft, smooth, naturally sweet. She tasted it with a plastic spoon. It wasn't perfect, but it was something new, something fun. She felt like she was unlocking a superpower, taking nothing and turning it into a treat. When the muffins were done, golden brown edges, little bean and rice crowns puffing up slightly, she pulled them out with the grace of a trained chef. She plated everything with care. 3 savory muffin bites each, and a small scoop of frozen banana cream on the side. She scribbled a name into her notebook, the Thursday night surprise, and underlined it twice. The kids returned from school, buzzing with questions and hungry from gym class. They sat down at the table and froze when they saw their plates. Jamal looked at the muffins. Wait, are these cupcakes? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Do they smell like cupcakes? Ayana leaned in. They smell like chili. Chili muffins, Vanessa declared. Very rare. Only made on secret Thursdays. They dug in, and for 5 solid minutes, the kitchen was filled with chewing and quiet murmurs of appreciation. Then Jamal said, "This is actually really good." Ayana had already finished too, and was licking the spoon from her dessert. "What's this ice cream?" Vanessa smirked. "Would you believe me if I said it was just frozen banana?" Ayana's eyes went wide. Magic banana again. Jamal looked at the spoon. "Wait, seriously? This is banana?" Vanessa nodded. "Banana. Peanut butter. That's it." They were in awe. And for a moment, Vanessa allowed herself to feel it too. Not pride. Not relief. Joy. Unfiltered joy. Because she'd made something fun in the middle of scarcity. Because her children had been delighted. Because she had eaten a treat and not just rationed it. That night, the Uno game went longer than usual. Laughter came easier. The walls, usually thin and echoing with the noise of the outside world. Neighbors arguing, footsteps overhead, the occasional siren. Now echoed back the sound of something Vanessa hadn't heard in a while. Lightness. After bedtime, she cleaned the dishes quietly, then sat on the couch with a notebook and a mug of hot water. No tea bag, just the heat. It was enough. She flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "What we've learned so far." Under it, she listed, "Kids are more resilient than we think. Oatmeal fatigue is real. Naming meals makes them feel special. Dessert doesn't require money, just creativity. Scarcity doesn't have to mean shame." She stopped, then added, "Abundance is not quantity. It's warmth." She closed the notebook and pressed her palm to the cover. The living room was dark now, silent, but not empty. For the first time in years, Vanessa didn't feel poor. She felt powerful, because while the world measured wealth in dollars, square footage, and brand names, she had discovered another currency entirely. Grace. The kind you give yourself. The kind you pass to your children like a bedtime story. The kind that turns black beans and cabbage into a feast. By Friday morning, something had shifted in the air. Not the weather. It was the same heavy gray. Not the kitchen. Still modest, still clean. But something in Vanessa had changed. The weight was still there. The pressure, the budgeting acrobatics, and quiet fear of what would happen if someone got sick, if something broke, if the plan unraveled. But today, she felt ready. Ready for the end of the week. Ready for the presentation. Ready to watch her son share a piece of their story, even if nobody in that classroom would understand the full truth behind it. Vanessa laid out Jamal's school uniform on the bed, smoothing the wrinkles with the back of her hand. Next to it, She placed the paper they'd handwritten together the night before. Our family's recipe: lentil carrot patties. Ingredients: 1 cup cooked lentils, 1 grated carrot, 2 tablespoons flour, a dash of garlic powder. Love. We make this when we want something filling, healthy, and warm. It reminds us that good food doesn't need to be expensive. My mom says it's not just food, it's strength. Jamal Brooks, age 9. He had asked her to read it 3 times. Practiced it once in front of Ayanna, who clapped with a dramatic bravo at the end. Now, as she packed his lunch, 2 patties wrapped in foil and a small baggie of carrot sticks, she felt something she hadn't felt since the challenge began. Pride that wasn't survival-based. When Jamal came into the kitchen dressed and ready, Vanessa kissed the top of his head and handed him the recipe paper. "You good?" He nodded, kinda nervous. "But it's cool. Remember," she said softly, "this isn't just about food." "I know. It's about what we can do." He understood more than she expected. Ayanna was still brushing her teeth when Jamal left for school. Vanessa made her oatmeal quickly, this time stirred with peanut butter and cut up carrots for a crunch. Ayanna didn't complain. She'd turned the food into part of the week's story, a story she now felt proud to live in. By 9 a.m., the apartment was quiet again. Vanessa took her time cleaning the floors, the counter, even the insides of the microwave. Not because it needed it, but because it gave her space to think. Later that morning, she walked to the nearby dollar store with her $1.38, the last bit of her challenge budget. She didn't even grab a card, just browsed the shelves slowly, reading every label like it was a novel. She picked up a packet of generic ramen, studied it, then put it back. Too much sodium. Not filling enough. She saw a can of mixed vegetables on sale for 79 cents. She took it, then reached for a box of store-brand Jell-O for 55 cents. Total, $1.34. She handed over the coins and received 4 pennies in return. It felt like a tiny victory, not because of what she bought, but because she'd finished the week without going over. She held the receipt in her hand on the way home like a trophy. Back at home, Vanessa turned on some music, low and lo-fi, and started prepping dinner in advance. The plan was to use the last tortillas and eggs for wraps, mix in the canned veggies for texture and a little color, then make dessert, Jell-O in 3 little bowls for the kids to find after dinner. It would be simple, but it would feel like a celebration. She knew they needed that, and so did she. By mid-afternoon, the kids were back. Ayanna came running through the door first, backpack bouncing, cheeks flushed. "Did you know I drew her oatmeal for our class?" she said breathlessly. "Ms. Price said it looked like real steam." Vanessa laughed. "Our little artist." Then Jamal walked in, slower, quiet, but smiling. He handed her the recipe paper. A red sticker was now on the top. A small note from the teacher read, "Wonderful family recipe and a beautiful message. Thank you for sharing, Jamal." She looked at him. "How'd it go?" He shrugged. "Try not to look too proud." They liked it. Some kids asked if it was like falafel. I said kinda. One kid said it sounded gross. He paused. I didn't care. I told them it keeps us strong. Vanessa's heart caught. Because that wasn't just bravery. That was ownership. He didn't apologize for it. He didn't shrink from it. He claimed it. And in that moment, she realized. The challenge was never just about meals. It was about identity. About turning scarcity into something that could still stand tall inside. Dinner was calm. The wraps were warm and filling. The Jell-O wobbled cheerfully in their bowls. They ate every bite. They laughed over who could make the Jell-O dance the most on their spoon. They talked about Friday plans, movie night with an old DVD they hadn't watched in years. And nobody asked what was for breakfast tomorrow, because they weren't afraid anymore. They trusted that whatever it was, it would be enough. Later, while the kids watched their cartoon reruns, Vanessa checked her prepaid phone. There was a message from her friend, Trish, the one she used to work with at the school cafeteria. "Hey, I saw your Reddit post. Girl, you're a warrior. I sent something small. Check your mailbox tomorrow. Proud of you." Vanessa blinked. She had posted once on Reddit, anonymously, never mentioned her name, but the internet had a way of connecting dots, of reminding you that someone, somewhere was watching and cheering. She didn't know what Trish had sent. Maybe a bag of flour, maybe a card, but she knew one thing. She wasn't invisible. And when you live on the edge for too long, that's the one thing you start to fear the most. Not being broke, but being unseen. That night, she folded the recipe paper Jamal brought home and tucked it in her notebook. Right next to the page that read, "What we've learned so far." She added one more line. 7. Our story matters, even when it's written in lentils. Then she turned off the lamp, kissed her children goodnight, and sat in the dark for a long time. Not because she was sad, but because she was full. Not from food, though her stomach wasn't empty. Not from money, though her wallet was still thin. But from something deeper. From the knowing that she had kept a promise to herself. That she had protected her children's dignity. That she had turned $30 into more than meals. Into memory. Into magic. Into momentum. And that maybe, just maybe, she was ready for what came next. Saturday arrived with quiet. Not the anxious silence that filled the early days of the challenge, but the kind of silence that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. Vanessa sat on the edge of her bed, her body still aching from the week, but her spirit strangely light. This was the final day. 7 days. $30. One mission. Feed her family. Protect their joy. Keep their dignity. And now, with only one meal left to prepare and a few pennies still tucked in her coat pocket, she had made it. But survival wasn't the victory. The way she did it, that was. Ayana came in first, dragging her favorite blanket and rubbing her eyes. Is the challenge over? Almost, Vanessa said. Today's our last day. You ready? Ayana blinked. Are we getting cereal tomorrow? Vanessa laughed. Yes, I already promised. Then I'm very ready. Jamal followed, more alert. I want eggs for breakfast. Vanessa smiled. Let's see what we can do. She stood in front of the open fridge. It was nearly empty now. Inside sat a single boiled egg in a reused container, half a tomato wrapped in foil, a few shreds of cheese, and 3 tablespoons of cooked rice in the back corner. The pantry held 1 flour tortilla, the last few spoonfuls of peanut butter, and a single onion. Most people wouldn't call it much. But after a week of inventing meals from scraps, Vanessa saw potential. She grabbed her notebook and flipped back to the blank page she'd saved for the final day. Saturday breakfast, the gratitude wrap. She wrote it down before even knowing what it would be. With a soft hum under her breath, she chopped the onion and tomato, tossed them in a pan with water and a bit of oil, scrambled in the chopped boiled egg, then spooned the mixture into the final tortilla. A sprinkle of cheese melted on top, and she folded it into a wrap. It smelled better than anything she'd made all week. She sliced it into thirds, plated it with care, and called the kids to the table. They ate slowly, chewed thoughtfully, not because they were savoring a grand feast, but because they knew this was the final meal of the challenge. It wasn't just food. It was a milestone. When they finished, Ayana licked her fingers and said, "That was the best one." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Even better than the chili muffins?" Ayana nodded solemnly. "It had cheese." Jamal looked at his plate. "We should make that on Sundays, forever." Vanessa smiled. "Then it's a tradition." She cleared the plates, washed them by hand, and then stood in the middle of the small kitchen. It was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Every surface told a story. Every stain on the notebook, every lid reused, every small container, every memory they had created inside this week of scarcity, it had transformed the space. It was no longer the kitchen she resented. It was the kitchen where she won. Later that morning, Vanessa slipped on her hoodie and headed down to check the mailbox. The hallway smelled like old carpet and yesterday's cooking, the usual in her building. As she stepped into the mailroom, she spotted it immediately. A small package, brown box, her name scribbled in blue ink across the top. From Trish. She tucked it under her arm and climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of it more emotional than physical. Back inside, she opened it on the table while the kids played in their room. Inside, a box of pasta, a small jar of marinara, a bag of chocolate chips, and a folded envelope. She opened the note and read, "Vanessa, I saw your post. I knew it was you the second I read the lentil patties. You always knew how to make a dollar stretch. Thought you could use a little treat to celebrate. Love, Trish." Vanessa pressed her hand to her mouth. Chocolate chips. Not because they were essential, but because they meant someone saw her. Thought she deserved more than just what was needed. She stared at them like jewels. Then called the kids into the room. "Okay," she said. "Change of plans. We're ending this challenge with a celebration." She got to work. The pasta and marinara would be Sunday's dinner. She'd save it. A treat. but not today's goal. Today, she had a different mission. With the last bits of flour, a tablespoon of oil, and a little water, she made a rough dough. Kneaded it on the counter until it was soft enough. Rolled it flat. She chopped the last carrot into tiny bits and added a pinch of cinnamon and sugar. Folded the dough into triangles with the mixture inside. Then, the piece de resistance. She melted a small spoonful of chocolate chips over the stovetop in a makeshift double boiler, adding just enough water to stretch it thin. When the triangles came out of the pan, golden, crispy, warm, she drizzled the chocolate over them and dusted them with brown sugar. She served them on their 3 best plates. Budget baklava. The kids gasped. Wait, what's this? Dessert, she said. For making it through the week. Jamal took a bite, eyes wide. It tastes like a donut. Ayanna was too busy licking chocolate from her fingers to answer. Vanessa sat back and watched. This wasn't survival anymore. This was celebration. After they ate, Vanessa pulled out her notebook and opened to the final page. She wrote in big letters. What we proved. $30 is not enough, but we made enough. Planning is power. Kids don't need perfection. They need presence. Survival is a skill, and so is celebration. When you name your meals, they carry pride. There's no shame in stretching. Sharing your story opens doors. We are not alone. Chocolate matters. We have everything we need. She underlined that last line twice, then closed the notebook for the final time that week. That night, after the dishes were clean and the kids were in bed, Vanessa sat alone in the dark living room. Her hands were still. Her thoughts were quiet. She thought about the beginning, the fear, the tension, the doubt. How she'd stared into that fridge and wondered how she would do it. She thought about the moments that almost broke her, the oatmeal fatigue, the repeated meals, the exhaustion from hiding her own hunger. But she also remembered the smiles, the laughter over Jell-O, the confidence in Jamal's voice when he read his recipe aloud, Ayanna's pride in stirring oatmeal. This week, they hadn't just eaten. They had transformed. Vanessa wasn't naive. She knew the system was broken, that no family should have to stretch $30 across 7 days and call it a win. But she also knew that resilience wasn't about what the world gave you. It was about what you did with it. She stood up, walked to the mirror above the sink, and looked at herself. Really looked. Her reflection wasn't glamorous, but it was strong. Hair tied back, sleeves rolled, tired eyes, steady hands. She saw someone who had made miracles out of leftovers, who had refused to let her children feel ashamed, who had used a notebook, a $30 bill, and a spoon to write a love letter to survival, one meal at a time. And when she climbed into bed that night, she didn't feel like she had finished anything. She felt like she had begun something, a movement, a mindset, a memory that her children would carry for the rest of their lives. Because this challenge wasn't just about food. It was about power, the quiet, relentless, unstoppable power of a woman who refused to give up. Sunday didn't start with panic. No budgeting spreadsheets. No silent fridge stare-downs. No racing thoughts about stretching a can of beans into 3 plates. It started with stillness. Vanessa lay in bed for a few extra minutes that morning, her head pressed into the pillow, the sounds of Ayanna humming quietly in the other room and Jamal flipping pages of a comic book nearby. The challenge was over, but something inside her wanted to stay in this state just a little longer, to hold on to the feeling she'd carved out of exhaustion, effort, and quiet victories. This wasn't just the end of the challenge. It was a transition. She rose and walked barefoot into the kitchen, blinking in the soft daylight filtering through the blinds. The space was cleaner now, not because it had been scrubbed, though it had, but because it felt renewed, like each meal had cleared not just the pantry, but the air. Vanessa put on a pot of water to boil and opened the care box from Trish again. There it was, the bag of pasta and the jar of marinara. Their Sunday dinner, a meal that had not come from the $30 challenge. And that was okay. Today was about nourishment, not limits. She stared at the bag of pasta and thought, we made it, but we're not done. After breakfast, toast with a thin spread of peanut butter and apple slices from a neighbor she'd traded extra rice with, Vanessa pulled out her notebook. Same one she'd used all week. Same worn cover. Same careful handwriting. But today, it didn't hold desperation. Today, it held strategy. At the top of the new page, she wrote in bold, grocery list, post-challenge. Then underneath, goals, variety, Nutrients. Affordable treats. Staples that stretch. Enough for joy. This wasn't just about feeding her family anymore. This was about feeding their growth. She began to write. Oats bulk. Brown rice. Dry lentils. Whole carrots. Onions. Garlic. Eggs. Peanut butter. Tortillas. Canned beans. Bananas. Tomato paste. Potatoes. One treat, TBD. She paused at the last line. One treat. Not because it was indulgent, but because it was necessary. Because the challenge had taught her that joy didn't just come after survival. It was part of surviving well. She took the kids outside for the first time all week. The sun had finally cracked through the cloud cover, and the concrete courtyard outside their apartment building was buzzing with weekend chatter. Neighbors with laundry baskets, dogs being walked, kids on scooters. Ayanna raced ahead, arms flapping like wings. Jamal trailed behind, deep in a book but still watching her out of the corner of his eye. Vanessa walked in the middle, a woman who just last week wasn't sure how she'd feed her children. Now walking with her head high, knowing she didn't just get through it, she grew through it. At the local farmer's market, she walked slowly. Intentional, not with shame, but with strategy. She looked for the imperfect produce section, where a bruised apple could be half price, where the carrots were crooked but full of flavor. She found a bundle of carrots, long, earthy, still clinging to dirt. $1. She handed it over without hesitation. Bananas, 6 for $1.20. Got anything cheaper? She asked. The vendor looked down, then smiled. You know what? I've got a few soft ones in the back. You can have them. Free. Just gotta use them quick. Vanessa thanked him, not with embarrassment, but with respect. Because asking wasn't begging. It was smart shopping. At home, she organized the bags carefully. The new ingredients sat like building blocks on the counter, not just for meals, but for momentum. Jamal wandered into the kitchen and leaned on the counter. What are we making for dinner? She gestured to the pasta and sauce. We're having a gift tonight. He nodded. With garlic toast. She thought. We've got oil, flour, and one last clove. Might be able to whip something up. Ayanna peeked in. Is there dessert? Vanessa grinned. Banana ice cream. Chef special. Ayanna squealed. Yes. While the pasta boiled and the sauce warmed, Vanessa began organizing the pantry again. This time, not in desperation, but in preparation. Everything had a place now. Dry goods in jars. Onions hanging in mesh. Notebook on the top shelf. Open to the new list. She had created a rhythm out of scarcity. And now, she would use it to build consistency. Dinner was simple. The sauce simmered with garlic. The noodles cooked perfectly. The toast crisped in the oven, rubbed with oil and garlic slivers. They set the table like it was a birthday. Napkins. Cups. The good plates. Jamal lit the single tea light candle they used for special occasions. It flickered like hope. They ate slowly, silently at first. Then the conversation bloomed. Ayanna talked about wanting to cook next time. Real meals like chili muffins again. Jamal said he wanted to help make the grocery list, and maybe start a mini garden on the windowsill. Vanessa just listened, soaking it in. This wasn't a survival dinner. It was a foundation meal, a quiet turning point. Later that night, Vanessa tucked the kids into bed. Ayanna curled up with her blanket, whispering, that ice cream was better this time. Jamal just said, You did it, Mom. She froze. He added, the challenge. You did it. She leaned over and kissed his forehead. No, she whispered. We did. Then she returned to the living room and sat at the table with her notebook. On the back page, she began a new section. Next challenge. Budget meals for a month. She didn't need to do it for the internet. She didn't need to post another thread. She didn't need validation. But something inside her wanted to keep pushing. Not from fear, but from purpose. She had discovered more than how to stretch $1. She had discovered how to build a system. One that wasn't built on shame, but on choice. Because the challenge had ended. But the movement, that had just begun. Sunday night settled in with a softness Vanessa hadn't felt in weeks. No more calculations. No more wondering if there was enough rice or if the peanut butter would stretch through one more breakfast. No more stress gripping her spine while she stirred oatmeal or rationed out cheese like gold flakes. The $30 challenge was over. But in truth, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of everything else. After the kids were asleep, Vanessa sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of warm tea in her hands, and the notebook open in front of her. The pages were worn now. The ink faded in places. One corner of the cover was peeling, but inside was a story told in lists and scribbled meal names and crossed-out totals. A record of effort, of dignity, of deliberate survival. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. There was no sadness here, no sense of deprivation. What she felt was resolution. Because somewhere between Tuesday's chili muffins and Friday's Jell-O bowls, something had cracked open inside her. Not from pressure, from clarity. She flipped to the back and began to write one final entry. What I learned feeding my family on $30 for a week. Hunger is more than lack. It's fear, shame, silence. Dignity is built at the dinner table. Kids mirror confidence. Naming a meal gives it soul. Treats matter, not because they're necessary, but because they're joy. You don't need to beat the system to win. You just need to not give up. Community doesn't always look like charity. Sometimes it's a message from an old friend. Pride isn't in what you have, it's in what you do with it. Scarcity is loud, but grace is louder. Enough was never a number. It was always a feeling. She paused, staring at that last line, then underlined it. Twice. That phrase echoed as she closed the notebook for good. Enough was never a number. Because it wasn't about how many dollars she had. It was about how she used them. It was about how her kids had laughed, even on the oatmeal days. How they had felt full on meals she had once feared wouldn't stretch. How Jamal had stood proud in front of his class and read a recipe built from boiled lentils and courage. It was about Ayanna stirring the pot with confidence, whispering, "We're chefs." It was about finding identity in the challenge, not loss. The next morning, she woke before the sun. The fridge was no longer empty. The pantry had a rhythm again. She brewed coffee from the last scoop in the tin. She'd stretch it with hot water and a little cinnamon, the way her grandma used to when money was tight. Then she opened her laptop. She hadn't touched it all week. But now, she was ready. She typed up the entire challenge in detail. Each meal, each price, each hack, each feeling. She included the laughter, the fear, the wins, the flops. She included how the neighbor had traded rice for an apple. How the Jell-O had made her kids' eyes light up. How Trisha's box had brought her to her knees. Not because of what was inside, but because someone thought of her. Then she posted it. Not to boast, but to say, we did this. And you can too. Not because it's easy, but because it's possible. She ended the post with, I don't know if this story matters, but I know that I matter. And that, somehow, is enough. She clicked post and closed the laptop. By noon, the post had spread. It made it to the front page of a Frugal living thread, then to a budgeting subreddit, then to a parenting forum. Comments poured in. I cried reading this. Thank you. Bookmarking this for next time I feel like giving up. You just taught me more than any finance class ever has. Can we get more of your recipes? You're a genius. A real one. But the comment that made her breath catch came from someone named at HopeFloat78. You reminded me I'm not broken. I'm just trying. Thank you. Vanessa stared at that comment for a long time. Because that was the truth she had discovered in the middle of that little kitchen. She wasn't broken. She was just trying. And trying was sacred. That evening, she took her notebook off the shelf, not to write, but to teach. She sat with Jamal and Ayanna at the table and said, we're going to build next week's meal plan together. They lit the candle again. Not for ceremony, just because they could. Each child added one idea. Jamal said, I want a rice bowl night. Like a build your own. Ayanna said, breakfast for dinner. With pancakes, even if they're flat ones. Vanessa said, okay, we can make that work. She taught them how to balance a meal, how to stretch ingredients across recipes, how to find deals and substitute without shame. They weren't just being fed now. They were being raised. Later that week, a local journalist reached out through her email. I saw your Reddit post, she wrote. We'd love to feature your story in our Sunday series. Real voices, real families. Let me know if you'd be open. Vanessa stared at the message for a long time. She hadn't done this for attention. She had done it because she needed to know she could. But maybe sharing it would give someone else the same spark. She wrote back, yes, as long as the message is clear, this is about strength, not shame. And with that, her story, her small, quiet, private triumph, became a beacon. Weeks passed, and the $30 challenge became more than a memory. It became a movement in her household. They kept the old notebook now framed with sticky notes and little drawings from the kids. They kept the chili muffin recipe on the fridge. They created Pantry Power Wednesdays, where they'd invent something from whatever was on hand. And once a month, they'd try to do a $30 mini challenge. Not because they had to, but because it reminded them what they were capable of. One Saturday morning, Vanessa walked through the grocery store with a full cart, produce, bulk grains, spices she once deemed too extra. She smiled as she passed someone who looked overwhelmed in the dry goods aisle. She stopped, took a breath, and said, "If you ever want to stretch $1, start with lentils. Trust me." The woman blinked, then smiled. And in that moment, Vanessa realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was passing it on. Vanessa didn't win a prize for her challenge. She didn't get a book deal or 1 million followers. But she got something more powerful. She got ownership of her kitchen, of her story, of her voice. Because in a world that says you need more to be worthy, she proved that enough isn't about numbers. It's about knowing what matters. And that's a meal worth remembering. Some people mark the end of a challenge by leaving it behind. Vanessa didn't. She marked it by stepping forward. The $30 grocery challenge had started as a necessity, a last-ditch effort to survive a week on what little remained. But now, on the other side of it, she was no longer simply surviving. She was strategizing. It began with a simple act. One quiet Tuesday morning, Vanessa walked into her local library, a place she hadn't stepped foot in for months. The kids were in school, the laundry was drying, and her notebook, the same one that held every meal, every breakdown, every tiny miracle from that $30 week, was tucked under her arm. She wasn't there to read. She was there to research. Budget cookbooks, community board notices, printouts on meal planning, couponing, and food bank rotations. If the challenge had taught her anything, it was this. No one is coming to save you, but you can learn to save yourself. And learning was free. Vanessa sat at a table in the back corner and began flipping through pages like she was studying for an exam. She copied down ideas on how to batch cook with beans, how to sprout lentils in a jar for added nutrition, how to build base meals that could adapt with whatever was in her fridge. She noted discount apps and local stores that ran weekly sales. She even found a binder of community resources tucked in a plastic sleeve on the wall, with information about a low-cost CSA program that would deliver seasonal produce to her neighborhood. She smiled quietly. She had no idea this world existed, but she would now use it like a map. That night, when Jamal asked if they were doing another challenge week, Vanessa said, "Not exactly." He furrowed his brow. "But I liked it." "I know," she said. "We're doing something better." He looked intrigued. "Like what?" Vanessa leaned in. "We're going to build a system, so we never have to do a challenge out of fear again." The next morning, she drew a chart on a sheet of paper and taped it to the fridge. Across the top, meal themes for the week. Monday, soup night. Tuesday, pasta night. Wednesday, pantry power. Thursday, breakfast for dinner. Friday, DIY bowls. Saturday, kids' choice. Sunday, something new. It wasn't rigid. It wasn't complicated, but it gave structure, a skeleton to build on. It turned each week from a scramble into a strategy. Ayana decorated the edges with tiny drawings of pancakes and smiley-faced onions. Jamal added bonus night in parentheses under Sunday. Just in case, Vanessa started using a whiteboard in the kitchen. Every week, she'd write the grocery budget total at the top, even if it was still tight. Sometimes it was $40, sometimes $60, rarely more than $80. But it didn't matter, because now she wasn't guessing. She was tracking, and that shift, from reacting to preparing, changed everything. At work, her coworkers started noticing. One afternoon, during a break in the break room, someone asked what Vanessa had packed for lunch. She lifted the lid to show a mason jar layered with seasoned lentils, rice, roasted sweet potatoes, and sautéed greens. "I batch cooked it Sunday," she said. "Looks gourmet," they joked. But Vanessa didn't laugh it off. She smiled and said, "It costs less than $1. That's why I cook." There was no shame anymore. No self-deprecating jokes to ease the discomfort. She was proud now, proud to make the most of what she had, because she finally realized frugality wasn't failure. It was mastery. She started posting little tips online, just a few at a time. How to make broth from scraps. How to reinvent leftovers. How to shop backward. Pantry first, store second. And the messages trickled in. I tried your rice pancake trick. Game changer. Can you share the muffin tin chili recipe? I followed your weekly themes. It's saving me hours. Vanessa was no influencer. She didn't have brand deals or a curated kitchen with marble counters. But she had credibility because her advice came from the front lines. And more than anything else, she was relatable. One Sunday afternoon, she hosted a cooking play date. 3 parents, 5 kids, one tiny kitchen. They made Jell-O, chili muffins, and budget baklava. She printed out little recipe cards with cartoon drawings. At the end of the day, one of the moms pulled her aside. "You're really good at this," she said. "Ever thought about teaching a class?" Vanessa blinked. "I'm not a chef." "No," the woman said. "You're better. You're someone we trust." That night, Vanessa wrote 3 words in her notebook. "Start where you are." It had been a mantra during the challenge. Now, it became her compass. She reached out to the local library, offered to host a free workshop. Feed your family without shame. Real food, real budgets. The director emailed back enthusiastically. "We'd love that. And we can print materials if you need." The day of the class, she wore her favorite hoodie, carried her old notebook, and brought ingredients for her lentil chili. A dozen people showed up. Single moms, retirees, college students, one couple with twins. She stood at the front of the room, hands shaking slightly, then opened with, "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to remind you that you're not broken." She walked them through her week on $30. She showed them how to plan meals that flexed. She taught them to read unit prices. She passed around jars of bulk oats and lentils like they were treasure. They took notes like their lives depended on it, because for some, it did. Afterward, a teenager came up and said, "This was the first time I didn't feel judged for being broke." Vanessa nodded. "It's not your fault, but it can be your power." That night, she came home and sat in the same spot where the challenge had begun. Same kitchen, same cracked tile, but everything felt different, because she hadn't just learned how to stretch a dollar. She had learned how to stretch herself. And now, she wasn't shrinking back into survival. She was expanding into service. The meals were stable now. That part, at least, had settled. But Vanessa had learned something critical after the $30 challenge ended. Food is only the front door. The rest of the house still needs light, rent, electric, phone bills, the school field trip Jamal wanted to go on, the sneakers Ayana would soon outgrow. Feeding her family had started with beans and rice. But if she wanted peace, she'd have to start feeding their future, dollar by dollar. It began one rainy Friday night, when Vanessa sat down with a pile of unopened envelopes. Not because she'd been reckless, but because when you don't have enough to cover everything, the mail starts to feel like a threat. Red stamps, warnings, balances due, deferred deadlines. Fear made you numb, and numbness made you passive. But now, she was awake. She sorted everything into piles on the floor, bills, notes from the school, grocery receipts. Ayana sat on the floor nearby coloring, and Jamal was stretched out with a book. Vanessa opened her notebook, not the old one, a new one, fresh pages, blank. She turned the first page and wrote in all caps across the top, "Taking back the budget." This was no longer about escaping a bad week. This was about building a life. She began by writing down every recurring monthly expense. Rent, $1,020. Electricity, averages $95. Phone plan, $48. Internet, $32. Transportation, bus plus gas when needed $75. Groceries, Target $300. Miscellaneous, $50. Emergency buffer. She left it blank. Then she listed her income, her job cleaning offices part-time, and her weekend shifts at the bookstore. All in, around $1,550 a month. She stared at the numbers. There wasn't much wiggle room, but there was a pattern. And if there was a pattern, there could be a plan. Vanessa had never used a budget app before. She didn't even know what a zero-based budget was until the challenge. But now she was watching YouTube tutorials at midnight, scribbling strategies in the margins of her notebook like a student in a master class. She tried envelope budgeting first, dividing cash into labeled envelopes, groceries, gas, kids. She even let the kids help decorate them. Jamal's envelope had drawings of chili muffins and tacos. Ayana's had flowers and sparkles. Of course, they loved it, not because it was about money, but because they could see the plan. It made the invisible struggle visible, and that made it feel manageable. Next came the meal system. Vanessa built a rotating 4-week plan, themes for each day of the week, with variations to avoid burnout. Week 1, lentil chili, oats with fruit, homemade flatbreads. Week 2, brothy noodles, rice stir-fry, sweet potato mash. Week 3, veggie pasta, split pea soup, breakfast for dinner. Week 4, wrap night, pantry stew, Jell-O dessert. All built around pantry staples. All under $60 a week, max. She posted the plan on the fridge. Her whiteboard became the mission control center of the house. Jamal called it Budget HQ. Vanessa called it a system. She added a Sunday night routine, family finance check-in. They'd each share one win and one goal. Jamal once said his win was helping find a coupon for oats. Ayana's was drawing smiley faces on the leftover containers. Vanessa's? Paying the electric bill early. They clapped. They cheered. Because small victories are still victories. She started putting $10 a week into a savings jar. She labeled it Peace Fund, not emergency. Because emergencies are about fear. But peace? Peace is power. After a month, she had $40. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had before the challenge. And every time she walked past that jar, she didn't just see coins. She saw momentum. At school, Jamal's teacher noticed a change. He's been more confident, she said during parent conferences. Talks about helping with dinner, with the family budget, even. Vanessa smiled. He's learning. We all are. That night, Jamal handed her a folded sheet of paper. It was a list of things he thought they could make at home instead of buying. Granola bars, pancake mix, frozen pizza, popsicles, even ketchup. Vanessa laughed and hugged him. He was 9, but he was already thinking like a provider. Then came the conversation she'd been avoiding. Debt. A $900 credit card from years ago, gathering dust and interest. She hadn't touched it in forever, but it loomed like a shadow. She called the company. The hold music played for nearly 15 minutes. Her hand shook slightly, but she waited. And when someone answered, she said calmly, I want to make a plan. They worked out a payment arrangement, $50 a month. No penalties if she stayed on time. It would take time, but she had something now she hadn't had in years. A system, a routine, a reason. Sunday mornings, Vanessa sat with her coffee and reviewed the week. She tracked expenses, checked balances, adjusted meals. The kids would sometimes join, offering ideas. Jamal had even made a spreadsheet once on Google Docs. It was clunky and cute. Ayana asked if they could save for an ice cream date. Vanessa added a new envelope. Treats. Not out of guilt, out of intention. She began journaling again, this time about more than meals. About dreams. Someday, she wrote, she wanted a tiny backyard garden. A place to grow tomatoes, green onions, even herbs. She wanted to teach budgeting in schools. She wanted to turn her life, once shaped by lack, into a curriculum for strength. And maybe even write a book one day. Call it something like, Enough Isn't a Number. She smiled, because now, that didn't feel impossible. It fell on its way. It started with a message. Simple, direct, timid. Hi Vanessa, I saw your workshop flyer. I'm really struggling to feed my baby on WIC. I don't know what to do anymore. Do you ever talk to people one-on-one? Her name was Lacey, 23. New mom. No partner. No car. No plan. Vanessa remembered that feeling. The way everything collapses at once. Sleep, money, identity. And you're left staring at the kitchen shelf wondering how applesauce and peanut butter are supposed to build a week's worth of meals. So she didn't hesitate. She replied, Yes, come over. The following Tuesday, Lacey showed up with a stroller, a WIC printout, and eyes full of fatigue. Her daughter, Amira, was just over 6 months. Quiet, big-eyed, and dressed in a hand-me-down hoodie that had once belonged to Jamal. Vanessa had made a pot of split pea soup and banana oat muffins. Not to impress. To say, you are welcome here. Lacey ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to exhale. Vanessa let the silence do the work. Then she said gently, You're doing better than you think. And Lacey crumbled. Between bites, between tears, the story poured out. Food stamps, eviction threats, nights sleeping on her sister's couch, diapers rationed one at a time, and mostly, the shame. Not just from strangers, but from herself. I should have figured this out by now, Lacey whispered. Vanessa leaned forward. I lived on $30 for a week once. Not as a badge of honor, but because I had no choice. What matters isn't where you are. It's what you do from here. And for the next 3 hours, they didn't talk about failure. They talked strategy. Vanessa pulled out a spare notebook. She walked Lacey through the exact steps she had taken, from whiteboards to envelope budgeting to meal rotation systems. She customized it based on WIC items, showing her how to blend oatmeal with pureed fruit, how to stretch formula, how to turn beans and rice into soft, baby-friendly meals. They made a tiny goal list. Call the local diaper bank. Find the closest free food pantry. Plan 5 meals using WIC staples. Start a leftover magic bin for reuse. When Lacey left, she hugged Vanessa like someone who had finally been told she was still worth helping. That night, Vanessa lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Her kitchen had become more than a room. It had become a hub, a place where fear turned into formulas. And now, she wanted to build something bigger. Not a business, not a brand, just a network, built by real moms for real survival. She called it Table Together. The idea was simple. One Saturday a month, her apartment would open up for what she called meal swap sessions. You bring what you have. You take what you need. No judgment, no questions, just food, community, and dignity. The first session had 4 women. One brought canned tomatoes. Another brought half a box of pasta. Someone showed up with 6 pounds of rice they'd gotten in bulk. Vanessa offered her kitchen, muffins, and a big pot of broth to start the base for everyone. They swapped recipes like currency, shared tips, passed around babies, and laughed, really laughed. That night, Vanessa wrote in her journal, "Hunger isolates, but community feeds." She didn't need to scale it. She just needed it to keep going. By the 3rd month, Table Together had become a ritual. More than a dozen women came regularly. They brought things that couldn't be bought in stores. Ancestral stew recipes, spice blends from their cultures, the kind of practical knowledge that only comes from experience. Vanessa added a teach-back element to each swap. One woman taught how to dry herbs on a budget. Another demoed how to freeze baby food in ice trays. Vanessa walked them through budgeting templates they could print from the library. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about equipping women to stand taller. And somewhere in all that movement, Vanessa began to feel something she hadn't in years. Stillness. Not inaction. Just peace. The kind that comes when you're no longer being chased by the math in your head. The kind that comes when your kids eat and smile. Not because it's fancy, but because it's enough. The kind that comes when someone calls and says, "Hey, I heard you help people. Can I come?" One rainy Thursday afternoon, Lacey called. "Vanessa, I got approved for a housing voucher. We're moving out of my sister's place next week. It's not much, but it's ours." Vanessa cried on the spot, because even though it wasn't her own move, it was her own victory. Later that night, Vanessa sat with Jamal and Ayana and said, "What would you think about us helping more people like we did with Lacey?" Jamal said, "Like a grocery ferry?" Ayana said, "Can we bring the muffins?" Vanessa said, "Yes, and yes." They brainstormed a plan. Collect donated pantry items from the food swap. Make tiny gift bags with recipe cards. Deliver them to people starting over. They called it Hope Baskets. Each one would include a meal plan for 3 days, budget tips, a note that simply said, "You are not alone." Vanessa printed 10 recipe cards that weekend. She watched Jamal staple them together like a mini workbook. Ayana decorated the envelopes. They made it a family ritual. Pack the basket Saturday morning. Drop them off Saturday afternoon. The first one went to a shelter nearby. The next to a woman who had fled domestic violence. The third to a single dad at their church who had just lost his job. Each delivery was quiet, respectful, dignified, because this wasn't about pity. This was about power. Shared, handed, received. At the end of that month, Vanessa stood in the middle of her kitchen, now filled with new faces, kids dancing in socks, and a big pot of pantry soup on the stove, and she smiled. This wasn't a success story. It was a system story. The system of care she had built for herself now held others, not by accident, but by design. She still struggled some months. The bills didn't magically disappear. The grocery prices still crept up. The budget was still tight. But her life no longer was, because she had replaced shame with strategy. Isolation with connection. Hunger with hope. And hope, once planted, has a way of growing wild. Even strong walls shake in a storm. Even well-built systems bend when the wind changes. For Vanessa, that moment came on a gray Tuesday morning, just before school drop-off. Her car wouldn't start. Again, it wasn't a surprise. The car was 12 years old, held together by luck and prayer, and it had survived more breakdowns than she could count. But this time, the starter didn't even try. Just a hollow click. Then silence. Vanessa sat in the driver's seat with her forehead resting on the steering wheel. The kids were already in the back, backpacks on their laps, talking about cereal and spelling quizzes. She forced a smile and turned around. Okay, change of plans. Looks like we're catching the bus today. Jamal groaned. Ayanna asked if it meant they'd be late. Maybe, Vanessa said. But we'll get there. That evening, after the kids were in bed, she ran the numbers. Bus passes, $42 per week. Rideshare to work on early mornings, $18 per trip. That alone would gut her transportation envelope. And worse, the local mechanic quoted her $610 for the starter and labor. She had $92 in her peace fund. It wasn't enough. She stared at the whiteboard, still filled with her carefully written meal plan, envelopes lined up neatly in a row. The system she had built was supposed to protect her. But tonight, she felt unprotected. Not because it had failed, but because life doesn't always care about your best intentions. Still, she didn't cry. Because even in that moment of quiet disappointment, she realized something. The old her would have spiraled. The new her had a blueprint. First, she adapted. She sat down and revised the grocery plan for the week, removing anything non-essential. She switched to meals that required no oven use. To keep the electric bill down, she put off one of her weekend side gigs that required the car and messaged the client directly. I'm dealing with a repair this week. I can reschedule or help you remotely. They replied, totally understand. We'll make it work. Next, she reached out to her network. This wasn't begging. It was activating support. She messaged the Table Together group and posted, starter's gone out on my car. If anyone's got a mechanic connection or is heading to the west side this week and has a spare seat, I'll barter soup and muffins for a ride. By nightfall, she had 3 offers. One woman offered to drive her to work 2 mornings that week. Another recommended a used parts yard that might have the piece for half the price. Someone else dropped off bus passes anonymously. Vanessa stood at the door, holding the pass in her hand. There was no note, just a small sticker with a heart drawn on it. She cried then, because this was what she had built. A web, a village, a circle of women who no longer asked for help quietly, but passed it out freely. She called the mechanic the next day, asked if he'd be willing to install a used part if she brought it. He agreed. Labor would be cheaper too. With some negotiation and a little hustle, the whole repair would now cost her $275. Still steep, but reachable. She pulled $50 from her peace fund, another $50 from her treat envelope. They'd skip the ice cream date this month. The rest? She would hustle. Vanessa offered a pantry cooking class at her local library for $25 a head. She made a simple flyer. Learn to make 3 meals for $10 or less. Real food, real budget. 10 people signed up. She borrowed folding chairs, made lentil stew and breakfast wraps, and taught with the same warm, no-nonsense style that made her kitchen so magnetic. She walked out with $250 in hand and a free tote bag someone had left behind. On the walk home, she whispered to herself, I did that. The car was fixed by Friday. The mechanic even smiled and said, I checked your tires. Topped off your fluids too. No charge. Vanessa drove home with both hands tied on the wheel, not because the car was fragile, but because the moment was so full it felt fragile. The kind of victory that no one else sees, but that lives in your chest forever. That weekend, she brought Jamal and Ayanna out to the community garden behind their library. It was a modest space, some raised beds, compost bins, an irrigation line held together with zip ties. She had signed up for a small 4x4 plot. They planted herbs, basil, green onion, cilantro. Is this what farmers do? Ayanna asked. Vanessa smiled. It's what survivors do. She sat in the garden, dirt under her nails, sun on her arms, and she thought about what it meant to be steady. Not rich, not out of the woods, but rooted. because this was the kind of life she was building now, rooted resilience. No more waiting for rescue. No more living on the edge of collapse. She had weathered the storm without falling apart, not because she avoided hardship, but because she'd built anchors. Later that night, she updated her envelopes, wrote, "Repair Fund," on a fresh one, added a new whiteboard section. What if? Plans. It wasn't pessimistic. It was powerful. Because if the brakes failed, if a paycheck got delayed, if the washing machine quit next, she'd know the first 3 steps. And that was enough to breathe. At the Sunday night check-in, Jamal asked, "What's your win this week?" Vanessa paused, then said, "I solved a $600 problem with a notebook and a bowl of lentils." He nodded slowly. "That's cool." And it was. Vanessa tucked the kids in, then went to her desk. She opened her old notebook, the one she started during the $30 week. On the last blank page, she wrote, "The system didn't stop the storm, but kept me dry. Some homes teach without a curriculum. Some lessons aren't in textbooks. And some classrooms, the most powerful ones, don't have desks. They have dinner tables, and dishwater, and whiteboards with budget notes scribbled in crayon." After the car repair and the rainy week, Vanessa found herself craving not just stability, but continuity. The kind of routine that didn't feel rigid, but safe, predictable, empowering, not just for her, but for Jamal and Ayanna, too. Because if she wanted her kids to grow up financially literate, emotionally grounded, and unashamed of simplicity, it had to start now. In this kitchen, in this apartment, with what they already had. That Monday morning, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Teach them gently, but teach them everything." The first lesson started with muffins. She made a batch of her banana oat version and handed Jamal a piece of chalk. "Write the cost of everything we used on the board," she said. He furrowed his brow. "Like guess." "No, you'll use the receipts." They pulled out a bag from the pantry labeled grocery math. Inside were wrinkled store receipts, saved just for this. She sat beside him while he wrote. 3 bananas, 75 cents. 1.5 cups oats, 30 cents. 2 eggs, 36 cents. Baking soda, 5 cents. Cinnamon, 4 cents. Oil, 20 cents. Total, $1.70. For 8 muffins, Jamal said. So like 21 cents each. Exactly. His eyes widened. That's less than the ones at the gas station. Vanessa nodded. And these don't come wrapped in plastic with 13 ingredients you can't pronounce. Ayanna giggled. Ours are prettier too. That was how it began, grocery math, every Monday. Sometimes Jamal would calculate cost per serving of their dinners. Sometimes Ayanna would guess how many meals they could make from one bag of beans. They weren't just playing. They were learning the economy of self-reliance. On Thursdays, they had leftover remix night. It wasn't just about food waste. It was about creativity. Vanessa would present the kids with a mix of random fridge items. Half a baked sweet potato, some rice, sautéed greens, a lone boiled egg. Tonight, she'd say, "We're on a cooking show. Mystery basket." Jamal would invent wrap combinations. Ayanna would suggest toppings. They voted on taste, texture, and plating style. Vanessa let them win. Most of the time, Saturday mornings became money hour. Vanessa didn't want budgeting to be scary. She wanted it to feel like planning a mission. So she bought a laminated U.S. map from a thrift store, stuck it to the fridge, and said, "This is our financial adventure. Every small goal we reach moves us across the country. Each envelope goal met, savings, groceries, treats, move their sticker van from one city to the next. Next stop, Chicago. Destination? San Francisco." Jamal asked, "Are we really going?" Vanessa smiled. "Not yet, but you'll know how to get there when it's time." She taught them how to break down their allowance. $2 each per week. Spend some. Save some. Share some. Jamal made a comic book envelope labeled Epic Fund. Ayanna started a kitten jar, though Vanessa hadn't agreed to a pet yet. They took turns donating quarters into the hoe basket jar, too. Because Vanessa wanted them to learn. Even when you don't have much, you always have something to give. One night, Vanessa was washing dishes when she overheard Jamal whisper to Ayanna, "Mom makes the best poor people food." There was no sting in his voice. Just pride. Like it was a badge. Vanessa smiled, hands still in the sink. She didn't correct him. Because she knew what he meant. He meant food, made with purpose. With magic. With love. Later that week, Vanessa was invited to speak at a parenting night at the community center. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. She brought her notebook, her muffin recipe, and her story. I'm not here to sell a system, she told the room of tired, overworked parents. I'm here to remind you that your kitchen is a classroom. Your grocery list is a lesson plan. Your budget is a love letter to your future self. They clapped. Some cried. Someone asked if she offered one-on-one coaching. She paused. I don't have letters behind my name, she said. But I have receipts. The room laughed, not in mockery, in relief. The next day, she received 3 messages from parents who wanted help setting up their own family meal systems. So she wrote a free guide, Eat Well on Less, a starter kit for families. It had 10 base meals, 5 budgeting games for kids, envelope templates, and one final note. Your worth isn't defined by your fridge. It's defined by your effort, your creativity, and your heart. You've already got all 3. That Sunday night, Vanessa sat with Jamal and Ayana and asked them to draw their dream dinners. Ayana drew pancakes with strawberries and rainbow sprinkles. Jamal drew tacos the size of his head. Vanessa drew a table, a big one, with lots of chairs, and a notebook in the middle. Because to her, the dream wasn't about feasts or flavors. It was about inviting others in. They didn't have much, but they had knowledge. And that was a legacy, passed down not with money, but with muffins and markers and Monday night grocery math. The eggs went up first, then the rice, then the peanut butter. One by one, the staples in Vanessa's carefully calibrated budget began shifting like tectonic plates, silent, slow, but powerful enough to fracture her numbers. What had once been a tight but manageable $60 weekly grocery plan now danced closer to $80. Even when she cut corners, clipped coupons, and leaned heavy on pantry items. And worse, nothing else had gone up. Not her paycheck, not the stipend for her library class, not the tiny child support deposit that came in once a month. The world was shifting without warning, and Vanessa knew. This was the next test. That Sunday night, she sat down with her grocery receipts. She had saved every single one since the first $30 challenge, even the torn ones, even the faded ones. She began lining them up on the floor in chronological order, week by week, and stared at the changes. Lentils, up 30 cents per pound. Oats, up 20 cents per canister. Milk, up 60 cents per gallon. Bananas, unpredictable. It wasn't a crisis, but it was erosion. And erosion, left unchecked, swallows systems whole. Vanessa didn't panic. She innovated. Because she knew budgeting was not a one-time act. It was a living organism. And like any living thing, it needed to evolve. So she pulled out her notebook and wrote at the top of a fresh page. Phase 2, Adaptive Grocery Plan. She didn't wait for a miracle. She built a strategy. First, the base meal matrix. She created a matrix of 10 base meals with interchangeable variables, each with a set anchor ingredient that wouldn't change, and 2 flex ingredients that could be swapped based on what was on sale or in season. Example: base, stir-fry. Anchor, brown rice. Flex, any 2 veggies plus protein, tofu, beans, egg. Another. Base, pasta bake. Anchor, elbow macaroni. Flex, sauce plus leftover bits, spinach, cheese, onion. Each meal costs between $1.50 and $2.50 per serving, adjustable with creativity. She laminated the matrix, stuck it to the fridge, made Jamal and Ayana help decorate it with doodles. It became their map for surviving price hikes without compromising taste or nutrition. Second, the community discount hunt. Vanessa started a group chat with 5 moms from Table Together and launched what she called Local Food Watch. Each mom tracked their local store's markdown bins, clearance items, and flash sales, then texted a photo or update into the group. It became a treasure hunt. Vanessa scored a bag of bell peppers for $1. Another mom found dented cans of beans for 33 cents. Someone else snagged 4 loaves of whole wheat bread for $2 total. They began trading, too. Vanessa had extra frozen carrots, swapped them for a neighbor's almond milk. It wasn't always neat, but it worked. Third, the DIY ingredient project. Vanessa made a list of 5 food items she would no longer buy, but would make herself. Pancake mix, granola, breadcrumbs, spice blends, Vegetable broth. Every Sunday, she'd batch cook and label them in reused jars. She let Jamal create silly names like Bread Blast Crumbs and Soup Hero Broth Base. Ayana added smiley faces and sparkles with markers. Not only did it cut costs, it gave the kids a sense of ownership. They weren't just eating food, they were crafting their survival. But the most powerful change didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from an unexpected source. A chalk sign outside the library read, "Public Food Force Volunteer Orientation, this Saturday." She paused. She had heard of community gardens, but a food forest? She attended out of curiosity. What she found was a hidden ecosystem, a permaculture-based plot designed to grow year-round produce using fruit trees, herbs, perennial vegetables, and native plants. And the best part? Free access to all volunteers. You help maintain it. You harvest it. No bureaucracy. No gatekeeping. Just food. Shared. She signed up instantly. And every Saturday morning after that, she and the kids would bike to the food forest with gloves, a trowel, and water bottles. They mulched. They learned which herbs repel pests. They harvested kale, rosemary, and even figs. Vanessa brought the harvest home and added a new envelope to her system. Forest to table. Inside it, she clipped recipes, pressed herb samples, and handwritten notes. Fig jam with oats. Kale stem pesto. Rosemary lentil flatbread. The envelope became a testament to what resourcefulness looks like when it takes root in community. Still, even with all the hacks, some weeks hurt. Like the week her favorite oatmeal went up $1.25 overnight. Or the time Jamal asked if they could buy strawberries, and she had to say, "Not this week, baby. Let's wait for the price to drop." But what mattered wasn't what they couldn't buy. It was what they had learned to build around scarcity. Because scarcity might bend their plans, but it could never break them again. On the first day of summer break, Vanessa cooked a meal using 90% homegrown or bartered ingredients. Kale and white bean soup, fresh rosemary bread, cold fig and banana oat pudding. As they ate, Jamal asked, "What's this called?" Vanessa smiled and said, "It's called enough." That night, Vanessa added the final sentence to the page she had started during the $30 challenge. She had left it blank, waiting for the right words. Now she wrote, "You can't stop the world from changing, but you can teach your kitchen to adapt." And she closed the notebook, not with fear, not with hunger, but with knowledge. It began with a crumpled permission slip. "Mom," Jamal said one Thursday evening, digging into his backpack, "we're doing a hero biography project in class. We have to pick someone who inspires us and write a story about them." Vanessa glanced up from the whiteboard, where she was scribbling next week's grocery schedule. "That sounds fun. Who are you going to pick?" Jamal shrugged. "I don't know. Some kids are doing MLK or Harriet Tubman. Some picked their dads." He paused. His voice dropped to a mumble. "I was thinking, maybe I could write about you." Vanessa froze. Not because she didn't feel honored, but because her mind instantly leapt to the unpaid bills in the drawer. The chipped linoleum. The fact that hero seemed like too big a word for someone who still bought powdered milk. But Jamal's face was serious. Not idolizing. Just honest. He meant it. To him, she was the one worth writing about. Vanessa exhaled, walked over, and knelt in front of him. "You sure, baby? It's okay if you want to pick someone more famous." Jamal shook his head. "I want to write about someone who actually saves people. You saved us." That night, after Jamal went to bed, Vanessa sat alone on the couch, holding his permission slip. Her fingers curled around the edges like it was a fragile photograph. And maybe it was a snapshot of how he saw her. Strong, grounded, whole. A far cry from how she had once seen herself during the $30 week. Broke, overwhelmed, stretched thin. But now, Jamal didn't see stretch marks in her life. He saw structure. He saw stability. And he saw sacrifice not as something invisible, but as visible love. Over the next week, Jamal asked her questions as part of his interview. "What's the hardest thing you ever had to do?" Vanessa thought for a long moment. "Waking up with nothing in the fridge and still finding a way to feed you and Ayana without letting you see me cry." Jamal wrote that down, slowly. "What are you most proud of?" She smiled. "Teaching you how to cook breakfast for under $1." Jamal grinned. "You're going to be in the Hall of Fame for oatmeal someday." They worked on the project every evening. Jamal drew a picture of Vanessa in her apron, holding a spoon like a sword. He titled it, "The Grocery Gladiator." He listed her superpowers: meal flipping, money stretching, budget magic, muffin multitasking, making boring dinners fun. Vanessa laughed so hard she cried. But underneath the humor was truth. Because while the world celebrated superheroes and capes, Jamal had lived with a woman who created order from scarcity and made it look like art. The day of the presentation, Vanessa braided his hair, ironed his cleanest shirt, and packed a breakfast wrap for him to eat on the walk to school. "You nervous?" she asked. "A little," he said, "but mostly proud." She kissed his forehead. "You're gonna make your hero proud." He looked up. "I already did." That afternoon, when he came home, he was practically glowing. "Mom," everybody clapped. Even Ms. Grayson said she wished you could come teach the other parents. "And Kevin said your grocery challenge was like something from a movie." Vanessa smiled. "I always said we lived a documentary." That night, she found a printed copy of Jamal's final essay tucked into his backpack. She wasn't snooping. She just wanted to know how he told the story. It was titled, "My Mom, the Budget Warrior." She sat down, opened the paper, and read. "My mom doesn't wear a cape. She doesn't have a big job. We don't live in a big house. But my mom is a hero because she fights invisible battles every day. She fought the fridge when it was empty. She fought the bills when the lights almost went out. She fought sadness when she didn't know how we'd eat next week. But she never let me feel scared. She never let me see her fall apart. She taught me how to count money and measure oats and write letters to the electric company. She made games out of hard times. She made recipes out of nothing. She turned a $30 grocery trip into a survival plan. I think heroes are the ones who make sure you always feel safe. And when I grow up, I want to be a hero like her. I want to save people with food and math and muffins. I want to be a budget warrior too." Vanessa didn't just cry. She wept. Not because the essay was beautiful, but because it was true. And because the one person she had spent years trying to protect had seen her all along. She put the essay on the fridge, next to the laminated meal plan and the Hope Basket envelope. Because it didn't belong in a drawer. It belonged on display. A reminder that sometimes the greatest honor isn't applause or awards. It's knowing your child sees your effort not as struggle, but as strength. That weekend, Jamal asked if he could help lead the Next Table Together gathering. "Can I teach the other kids how to make wraps like ours? I want to show them your hack." Vanessa smiled. "Only if you promise not to give away all my secrets." "Too late," he said. "I already wrote a recipe book in my notebook." She laughed, then let him. Sunday evening, she found him taping a sign to the kitchen wall. "Welcome to Jamal's Budget Kitchen, featuring Hero Mom." He drew a spatula with lightning bolts coming out of it. Ayanna added stars. Vanessa didn't correct him. She turned on the stove, handed him a bowl of beans, and whispered, "Let's cook, Hero." It started with a flyer, printed in black and white, taped to the library's corkboard between missing pet notices and piano lesson ads. "Budget Reset Workshop, free. All are welcome." The subtitle read, "How I Fed My Family on $30 and Built a System That Worked." Led by Vanessa Brooks. She stared at it for a long time before posting it. Not because she wasn't ready, but because it still felt surreal. That her life, her quiet, homemade system, was now a curriculum. The library conference room smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. It held 20 chairs. By the time the clock hit 6:02 p.m., every one of them was full. 3 women stood at the back. A man leaned against the bookshelf near the door. Some had notepads. Some had toddlers on their laps. All had questions in their eyes. Vanessa stepped to the front. She wore her apron, not out of necessity, but as a symbol. Not to look polished, but to look real. She began, not with a lecture, but with a story. "My name's Vanessa. I'm a mom of 2. 3 years ago, I was skipping meals so my kids could eat. 2 years ago, I started saving receipts. Last year, I turned that into a full food system. I'm not a chef. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just someone who got tired of crying in the kitchen." The room fell silent. Then someone murmured, "Say that again." So she did. "I got tired of crying in the kitchen." Vanessa walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 big words. Track, simplify, plan. Those are the pillars of what I'm sharing tonight. This isn't about making magic. It's about seeing clearly. She pulled a crinkled envelope from her tote bag. "First thing I did was start tracking. Every receipt, every can of beans, every ounce of regret after impulse buys. not to shame myself, but to spot patterns. She held up a notebook. This is my grocery diary. It told me more about myself than any Instagram had ever could. Some people chuckled. Some scribbled furiously. Next came simplify. I stopped trying to cook like I was on TV. No 15-ingredient dinners. No new recipe every night. I picked 5 base meals. I made them work. She handed out laminated copies of her base meal matrix. Your kids don't need variety every night. They need nutrition and predictability. One mother raised her hand, eyes wide. But what if you've got picky eaters? Vanessa smiled. Then you involve them. Make food a game. Let them vote on flavor combos. Call leftovers remix night. If they feel like part of it, they'll stop fighting it. Heads nodded. Pen scratched. Someone whispered. I needed to hear that. Then she moved a plan. Vanessa opened a small plastic bin. Inside were envelopes, meal cards, labels, a dollar store calculator, a mini dry erase board. This is my war chest, she said, but it's also my peace chest. She showed how she divided her weekly grocery money, how she added a flex envelope for surprise sales or needs, how she made a whiteboard meal plan every Sunday. But what if you fail? A man in the back asked. What if the money runs out? Vanessa didn't flinch. You pivot. You remix. You go to the pantry like it's Top Chef. You call your neighbor. You make rice 1,000 ways. You do not panic, because panic eats your money faster than hunger does. A hush fell over the room. No one looked at their phone. They were with her now, not as an audience, but as fellow soldiers in the quiet war of survival. Vanessa moved back to the front, wrote a final phrase on the board. Scarcity doesn't mean shame. She turned around slowly. We've been taught that being broke is a moral failure. That if you struggle to afford groceries, you're somehow less than. She pointed to the board. This is your proof that you are a strategist, not a victim. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted. Lightly, respectfully, but with a warmth Vanessa could feel rising through her chest. She hadn't just delivered a workshop. She had handed out blueprints for resilience. After the formal session, people lingered. A grandmother asked for a copy of the banana oat muffin recipe. A teen mom with a toddler asked how to start meal planning when you don't even own pots. Vanessa handed her a used pan from her bag. I brought spares, she said. Take what you need. We share, not shame. Jamal and Ayana were there too, manning the grocery math corner they'd set up with plain money and a chalkboard. Kids gathered around them, laughed, learned how to shop within $10 using pictures of food items. It was budgeting disguised as play. Vanessa watched them from across the room. Her chest felt full, not with pride, but with clarity. On her walk home, Vanessa passed the window of the community center where her first $30 week had begun. The memory returned, sharp and tender. That moment of walking in, ashamed, afraid someone would see the panic behind her eyes. Now she walked past with her head high, her eyes steady. She was no longer surviving. She was serving. That night, she got a message from the library board. Vanessa, we'd like to offer you a monthly spot for a budgeting and meal prep class. You can name your rate. You're changing lives. She read it twice, then whispered, I'm building a career out of the thing that once broke me. And she meant it. She opened her notebook that night and wrote on the last page of the second volume. Started with $30. Now it's a ripple. Let it flow. She closed the notebook, not as an ending, but as a beginning, because every person in that room now carried a piece of her strategy, her strength, her story, and they would share it again, and again, and again. There's a kind of wealth that can't be measured in bank statements. It lives in the way your child laughs, unburdened, in the sun on your shoulders during a day you didn't rush, in the feeling of breathing without urgency. Vanessa called it being rich in spirit, and she was ready to spend it. She had been saving for it for months. Not money, not exactly. She'd been saving time, energy, intent. She called it the freedom envelope. It wasn't stuffed with bills, but with free museum days circled in ink, a coupon for the botanical garden, bus passes she traded babysitting hours for, a handwritten list titled Joy That Costs Nothing. It was Saturday, and for once, the bag stayed packed with sandwiches, not spreadsheets. Today was for Jamal and Ayana. Today was for remembering why she fought so hard to make every dollar count. They started early. Bus to the park downtown, the big one with the fountains and bronze statues and jungle gym with a long, green slide that Ayanna swore was magical. Vanessa packed peanut butter roll-ups, apple slices, hard-boiled eggs, and lemonade in reused glass bottles. Jamal carried the blanket. Ayanna carried the snacks. Vanessa carried her journal, just in case the moment gifted her something worth writing. Spoiler, it would. They found a spot beneath an old oak tree. The branches formed a lazy net of shadows, the kind that danced slowly across their faces when the breeze picked up. Vanessa lay on the blanket and listened. Not to chaos, not to the hum of anxiety, but to her children laughing, climbing, sliding, racing each other barefoot. They visited the wish tree. It stood in the far corner of the park, wrapped in ribbons, string, and tiny pieces of cloth. Vanessa gave each of her kids a blank paper scrap. Write one wish, she said, but not for toys, for something your heart needs. Ayanna wrote, I wish we could always eat together. Jamal wrote, I wish Mom never has to worry again. Vanessa wrote nothing. She tied her ribbon silently. She'd already gotten her wish. Next stop, the museum. It was one of those pay-what-you-can days. Vanessa handed them a single folded bill. The volunteer at the desk nodded. Whatever you can give helps others come too. Vanessa smiled. That's why we're here. Inside, Ayanna floated from exhibit to exhibit like she was seeing stars for the first time. Jamal stuck close to the technology corner, tracing the circuits in an old-school transistor radio. Vanessa wandered between them, half a mom, half a woman reclaiming her own wonder. At one exhibit, they asked guests to write a word that described how they felt in this exact moment. Jamal wrote, electric. Ayanna, curious. Vanessa paused, then wrote, free. By early afternoon, they were sprawled on a museum bench, their legs tired but their spirits lit up. Vanessa pulled out one final surprise, 3 hand-folded paper spirit dollars. She handed one to each child, and kept one for herself. What are these? Ayanna asked, turning it over in her hand. They're for buying joy, Vanessa said. No price tag required. The only rule is, you must spend it today. Jamal blinked. Ow! Vanessa smiled. Use your imagination. Ayanna spent hers by skipping down the sidewalk singing, pretending she was on stage at a glittering concert. Jamal spent his pretending he was a street magician, performing coin tricks with bottle caps for passing strangers. Vanessa spent hers by sitting in the sun with her shoes off, eyes closed, imagining herself 5 years into a future she could believe in. No rent due today. No panic. Just pavement under her feet and kids beside her. They ended the day at the botanical garden. The security guard waved them in. He recognized them from a previous visit. Back again, Miss Brooks? Always, she said. The flowers keep calling us. They wandered the paths, letting the scent of jasmine and wild mint trail after them. At the koi pond, Ayanna whispered stories to the fish. At the herb garden, Jamal asked questions about oregano and thyme and why basil always grew fastest at home. Vanessa plucked a sprig, held it between her fingers, and breathed it in like prayer. Because the strongest things, she said, are often the ones that feed others. Jamal looked up. Like you. She smiled but didn't answer. She didn't have to. As the sun started sinking low, Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out a small Polaroid camera she'd borrowed. One photo, she said. Our first official rich in spirit day. Smile like you mean it. Click. The flash lit their faces, and in that one frozen frame, you could almost forget they were a family who once had a fight for every meal. Because in that moment, they had everything. Later that night, back at home, Vanessa taped the photo to the fridge next to the laminated meal chart, the grocery math game scores, and Jamal's essay. Beneath the photo, she wrote, Wealth isn't what fills the cart. It's what fills the day. She tucked the remaining snacks into the fridge, folded the blanket, and sat down on the couch. She opened her journal, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote, Today I didn't chase savings. I didn't stretch a dollar. I didn't solve a crisis. I just lived, and it was enough. She closed the journal, rested her head back, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't tired from surviving. She was tired from thriving. The apartment was quiet, not empty, just settled. Dishes were drying in the rack. Ayanna's socks were flung across the arm of the couch. Jamal's notebook sat open on the kitchen table, full of scribbles for his next budget hero comic. And Vanessa sat alone, a cup of peppermint tea steaming gently beside her. It was past midnight. The fridge hummed softly in the background, and in her lap was a journal. Not the kind for lists or meal plans. This one was for legacy. She turned to the last page, the final, untouched one. Then, slowly, deliberately, she began to write. Dear me, the version of me reading this 5 years from now. If you're holding this, it means you made it further than you ever dreamed. And I hope, truly hope, that you've kept the lessons from this tiny kitchen and these long, learning days. Her pen moved without hesitation now, like her story had been waiting for this moment to seal itself with truth. You remember how it started. $30 in a grocery envelope, 2 growing kids, an empty pantry, and a full load of fear. I remember sitting in front of a crumpled receipt, wondering if I'd messed everything up, if I gambled too much, if being hopeful was reckless. But then, you figured it out. One day at a time. One pot of lentils at a time. Vanessa smiled as she wrote, letting each word be a stitch in the tapestry of everything she'd repaired. You started tracking, not just dollars, but effort. You stopped apologizing for buying the generic brand. You turned your pain into systems, your panic into spreadsheets, your guilt into recipes. You didn't just survive, you learned how to teach survival. And that changed everything. She paused, her fingers pressed against the paper. Then she continued, more softly. One of the biggest lies you unlearned was that value comes from your income. Your real currency was creativity, resilience, dignity. And now, maybe you're in a bigger kitchen. Maybe you have a better stove. Maybe you finally bought fresh basil without flinching at the price tag. But don't forget what fed you when there was almost nothing. Knowledge, kindness, and a grocery envelope that refused to give up. She flipped back to an older page, the one where she had scribbled, I'm tired of crying in the kitchen. Now she added beneath it, I still cried. But this time it was from pride. Back to the letter. If you ever feel lost again, come back here. Back to the days you made jam from frozen berries and muffins from rice flour. Back to the nights you turned budgeting into a bedtime story. Back to the mornings Jamal called you a grocery gladiator. You're not the struggle you came from. You're the systems you built from scratch. Vanessa reached in her drawer and pulled out one of the laminated base meal matrix cards. She slipped it between the pages of the journal. A keepsake. A reminder. This was how she built peace. One swap. One spoonful. One saved dollar at a time. She glanced at the wall clock. 1:27 a.m. And still, she wasn't tired. Some part of her understood this was the moment she'd been walking toward since the challenge began. She reached for a second sheet of paper. This one, for someone else. To the woman holding her last $30, wondering if she can feed her family this week. You can. You will. And you don't have to do it alone. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're managing more than most people even realize. Don't let shame steal your strategy. Let it sharpen your instincts. Start with what you have. Make broth from scraps, pesto from stems, a plan from pantry dust. Use your kids' laughter as background music while you learn how to stretch. Teach them that wealth isn't about what's in your wallet. It's about what you do with it. And when you figure out a trick, share it. Share your budget hacks, your remixed meals, your small victories. Because every ripple becomes a wave. And trust me, we are the storm. Vanessa folded both letters and tucked them into the back pocket of the journal. Then she stood, walked quietly to the fridge, and taped one final note beside all the others. Written in black Sharpie on bright yellow paper. I'm not poor. I am powerful. Underneath, she drew 3 small dots. One for her, one for Jamal, one for Ayanna. A trinity of resilience. That Sunday, she carried her journal to the community center. She was no longer just the mom who made it work. She was Vanessa Brooks, budget educator. And her next class was full. Again, she opened her notebook, smiled at the first line, held it up for the room to see. It started with $30. Then she looked at them, at their unsure faces, at their open notebooks, at their hungry eyes, not for food, but for freedom. And she whispered, but it gave me a lifetime. Vanessa didn't win the lottery. She didn't go viral. She didn't climb out of poverty in one grand leap. But she built a system. She raised 2 children. And she taught a room full of strangers how to believe in the power of enough. This isn't just a story of how she fed her family on $30. It's the blueprint of what happens when resourcefulness becomes revolution. If this story moved you, if you've ever looked at your last $30 and wondered how you'd make it stretch, if you've ever felt unseen while doing the hard, invisible work of keeping a family fed, then you're not alone. Vanessa's journey is proof that strength isn't loud. It's in the quiet choices, the homemade systems, the meals that didn't seem like enough until they were. So here's your moment to start, to track, to simplify, to plan, and to know that you are powerful, even in scarcity. Subscribe for more real stories from real people finding freedom, dollar by dollar. This is Smart Saver Saturday, where resilience isn't just respected, it's revolutionary.